Hello, everybody! Oh, that was a little awkward. Whatever. Let's see. Is the microphone working? Check, check, check. Check, check. Okay, I think you can hear me. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's stream. I hope you all are doing well today. I'm not good at remembering names. I need to go back and read all the names again of your queens so I can remember who is who. I did really like your Supina, though. That's for sure. But okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's stream where we will be reading some more queens from infaminxy. And this week's streams are pretty short. We just have this stream and then a stream on Friday. Just trying to recharge, but then at the same time, I have a busy schedule, some stuff coming up, and I wanted to stream more, but I just felt like I needed to take a bit of a little break. So don't worry, I'm pretty sure we'll be back on a nice, more regular, you know, maybe like 3 streams a week soon, but just taking a little recharge. So I hope you're all doing well today and are ready to do some reading. And another disclaimer, just because we're infaminxy's queens involve Jig0109's queens does not mean we support him. Hope we all remember that. Okay, sorry, I'm a little off. Okay, so I think without further ado, let's just dive right in to right where we left off. Please forgive me if I stutter, hesitate, or mispronounce anything, and for any noise in the background. Okay, let me shrink myself down. Shrink, shrink, shrink. Okay, so the first queen we'll be reading today is Rhodacia the Charitable. From her mother's terrible despair, this queen arose and helped all, even if her mother disposed. And I don't remember whose daughter this is. Did we skip all of the Dark Ages, basically? Ah, this is Celestia's daughter, I'm pretty sure. Rhodacia the Charitable. Oops. Rhodacia Butterfly, the Charitable. Born 667, died 715. Was queen 687 to 710. Married to Clover Forest. Children, Demetria Butterfly. Rhodacia Butterfly was born during a cold night in 667, just after a blizzard had ended. She had roses, blooming diamonds as cheek marks, white-colored hair from her mother, and lavender eyes inherited from her paternal grandmother. Her name derived from the Hymenian word Rita, meaning strong leader. The young princess grew up having to wear fur coats and snow boots constantly, and having to stay inside for most of the time due to the eternal winter. This didn't really affect her mental state, though, as she was kept entertained inside with dolls, toys, and coloring. As for her personality, Rhodesia was extremely courteous and kind, always helping people around her, and caring for the ones she loved and giving them anything to protect them. After a heavy blizzard of 674, Rhodesia put on her coat and boots and ventured outside. Although she was prohibited from leaving the castle gates, Rhodesia broke the rules and went out into the village. While strolling through the village, Rhodesia noticed how bad life was for the commoners. All the famine... Let me just make sure the mic is still good. The disease, the poverty, babies crying while kids returned to houses without roofs, it was all terrible. Rhodesia continued to visit the village. She would even donate her own personal items to the families and other children, such as blankets, clothes, and toys. She felt horrible for them and couldn't stand to think they had to live like that. She would go as far as to request extra blankets and pillows to sleep, only to bring them to the commoners the next day. In 677, only a week after her 10th birthday, her father, King Jasper, died. He was walking back from the cornfields when he was attacked by a group of monsters. Rhodesia cried for weeks, and later resented her birthday for the rest of her life. When becoming more mature, around 1012, she realized why it seemed to always be winter, and why the kingdom was sunk into poverty, and the long story she found out it was her mother's doing. She was furious. After giving her mother the silent treatment for a week, Rhodesia realized her mother was trying to do as much as she could, and that her bitterness was only hurting her mother, and so she stopped. The older she got, the more serious Rhodesia became with her charity and donations. She began to hand out cooked meals and corn to the poor, and even began knitting clothes, blankets, and coats for them. The princess became highly praised and loved by the people for her kindness, and her presence was celebrated extremely, her handing buttery corn to children in her navy blue coat, and would later become iconic, giving her the title the Charitable. While hosting a clothes donation in the village one afternoon, she met a particular boy that went by the name of Hunter Smithsman. The two met when making conversation, and would later become best friends. With Hunter helping her with Hunter even helping with her charity. Hunter was a very kind, soft boy who loved art and drawing, but also was very attractive. On her 14th birthday in 681, she inherited the wand. After the wand metamorphosized, all the snow outside melted and the temperatures returned to normal. With a beam of sunshine came through the castle windows as everyone celebrated. However, just because the winter was gone didn't mean the effects of it had gone away. The kingdom was still sunken into poverty. Rhodesia's wand. Something else that happened when the sky cleared up was that Rhodesia's hair darkened to a gray color with a blue undertone. This is because apparently her hair was extremely sensitive to light. It would remain dark throughout the rest of her life, though during the winter and fall her hair would become slightly lighter. Rhodesia picked up a skill for cooking while doing her charitable acts. She would now bake entire meals and even set out soup kitchens for the villagers. And her food was described as to die for, just behind Queen Comet's level. Her most iconic foods were her baked chicken, potatoes, and corn soup. Hunter also collaborated with Rhodesia to help the community. The two even set up children's art event where kids could come and draw and paint with Hunter. In 685, Rhodesia decided to start a project to rebuild the village and fix the broken houses and buildings, or at least in the main district. Hunter helped her with the planning, and the citizens volunteered to help. She would also be able to get some workers from the House Roxon to help. During the construction, Harvey and Rhodesia began to get close, with Rhodesia staying over at Hunter's house to sleep sometimes, and Rita coming with him and Rita cooking with him. The two began to grow feelings for each other. It was after a kiss on the rooftop during the sunset that the two started a romantic and rather intimate relationship. Celestia was rather skeptical at first, but after meeting Hunter, She couldn't resist his sweet attitude, and when Hunter surprised his parents with his girlfriend being the princess, his mother fainted and his father's jaw dropped in shock. One night after construction, Rhodesia decided to stay over at Hunter's house for the night. Straight to the point, the two got rather intimate. It started with a little makeout session before the two fully embraced each other. Need I explain? Ew. During a winter's morning in 685, Celestia called Rhodesia down for a talk. She was extremely nervous, but when the words arranged marriage came out of Celestia's mouth, Rhodesia's nervousness turned into fury. She questioned why she would do such a thing, knowing she was dating Hunter. Celestia explained that she arranged the marriage with Forrest years ago, but had trouble telling Rhodesia until now. The next day, Rhodesia explained the arranged marriage with Clover Forrest to Hunter, and that no matter how much she begged her mother, there was no way to cancel it. He was extremely frustrated, but they had ended up talking and made up. They also decided that even after the marriage, they would still visit each other in secret. In 687, Queen Celestia died of tuberculosis, leaving Rhodesia as queen. Only a week after her coronation was Clover and Rhodesia marriage set into action. It was a very stressful day for her, though she kept her mind on her and Hunter's plan, Rhodesia's crown. Clover and Rhodesia's relationship was horrible. Rhodesia completely despised and ignored him, barely ever talking to him due to his rude attitude, and Clover despised her for this. But more or less, he never cared about her. He just wanted to be king and have all the money. Now being queen, Rhodesia used this to her advantage when it came to the construction. She hired more workers from the House Roxon and had way more resources. Finally, in 688, the construction was finished and the main district of the Kingdom Village was renovated and fixed. There was a big festival in the town to celebrate, and during so, Rhodesia and Hunter enjoyed it together, even dancing together. Rumors started to spread after this happened, but it seemed to not affect King Clover. Rhodesia also fixed the famine problem by regrowing the cornfields with the help of farmers from the Harassment kingdom, leaving an abundance of corn and food. Although the economy was still a complete mess and the kingdom was in debt, Rhodesia began to try and fix the issue. In the year 689, Rhodesia found out she was pregnant. She was confused as her and Clover had never done the act before, leading her to the conclusion that the baby's father was none other than Hunter. She told Hunter before anyone else, and while doing so broke down crying. Hunter held her in his arms and told her not to worry, and that he was extremely happy and that they would figure it out. Rhodesia began to visit Hunter more than ever during her pregnancy, but she could only keep it a secret for so long. After 4 months, her baby bump could not be ignored, and Clover began to grow skeptical. The secret came out when Rhodesia revealed everything to him one night. Clover simply sighed and insulted her and degraded her and Hunter's relationship, as well as saying, "What more would I expect from you?" Even told her to get rid of her mistake. The only reason Clover didn't leave her was because he didn't want to make a scandal. The public, however, didn't know about any of this. Rhodesia led them to believe the baby's father was Clover, as they expected. After this, Clover completely ignored Rhodesia besides a few acts of passive aggression, not caring for her at all and despising her. He also hated Hunter's guts and wished him death. Hunter, however, was there for her the whole time and cared for her. During the afternoon of 690, Rhodesia began to go into labor when with Clover. He simply left her and said, "Not my baby," before she rushed herself to the maids. Thankfully, one of the maids informed Hunter of the Queen's state, and he came immediately and supported her the entire time. That night, Demetria was born, the first and only heir in the heir in butterfly history. She inherited Hunter's brown hair and Rhodesia's lavender eyes. After Demetrius was born, Clover's hatred for Hunter grew stronger than ever. She completely despised Demetria, as she was basically a lingering embodiment of Hunter and Rhodesia's relationship. Hunter would come to the castle every day to take care of his baby daughter. He adored Demetria with all his heart. In 692, a horrific monster attack happened. They completely destroyed the main district, setting it on fire and harming the citizens. In the midst of it all, Hunter died protecting a young peasant girl. Rhodesia cried for days over the loss of Hunter. She was in a state of depression for the next few months, and was very stressed, as well as the entire village had been back to poverty and broken houses. Rhodesia spent all the finances she could on trying to rebuild, but she ended up running out, and due to the money she spent, she ended up having an extremely small amount of finances in the castle vaults, leading the entire kingdom into poverty once more. Tragedy struck once more when in 694 the cornfields were infected with disease, killing all the plants and leaving famine to return. Rhodesia had lost all motivation to try and resolve the issues of the kingdom. Her caring, empathetic spirit had faded. Because of this, she didn't even try to resolve the issue. People today describe the events of 692 to 694 as the Dark Age curse catching up with Rhodesia, and they were right. Within the 2 years, everything in Rhodesia's life came crumbling down, and after all of it, she was left unmotivated and depressed. Throughout the rest of Demetria's childhood, Rhodesia shielded her from the hatred of Clover. She gave her all the care she could. She later ended up telling Demetria the truth about her father. As for Demetria's response, that will be in the next chapter. With Demetria's marriage in 710, Rhodesia passed down the crown to her. She would later see the birth of her granddaughter Meteora in 714. Sadly, Rhodesia died to glomerulonephritis in 715. She would go down as one of the most charitable queens in the history, as well as perhaps the best queen in the Dark Ages. Rhodesia looking at the diseased corn. Oops. Just move that there. Okay. And that was the biography of Rhodesia the Charitable. Next biography, let's see who is next. Demetria. Now back to tapestries. Demetria. Aha, Demetria. Demetria the Harvester. When food product was low, she casted out a spell to make it grow. If any monster tried to take some and go, they would be no more. Demetria Butterfly, the Harvester. Married to Albinus Alistair, born 690, died 740. Was queen 710 to 735. Children, Meteor Butterfly. Demetria was born in 790 to Queen Rhodesia. She had brown hair and lavender eyes with violet sideways diamonds on her cheeks. She was the first ever princess to be born between a princess and a consort before marriage in uni history. Her childhood was in no means the happiest. Demetria's father completely neglected her, with the exception of him yelling at her when mad, which would result in Demetria feeling extremely sad. Some nights were spent crying instead of sleeping. Rhodesia, however, shielded her as much as she could from this hate and gave Demetria as much love as she could. Her father's neglection shaped Demetria's insecure, anxious personality throughout the years. Throughout her childhood, Rhodesia would take Demetria out into the village to play with the other common children. She did this because she wanted her to know what life was like for her real father. She wanted her to grow seeing what life was like without the luxuries of a castle. Among these visits, she made friends. Elaine, she had silver hair and green eyes, along with an intelligent, know-it-all-like attitude. Her and Demetria's absolute favorite thing was playing catch with balls. One day, Elaine's mother took her and Elaine to go plant vegetables in the small yard they had. This sparked an interest in gardening and growing things in Demetria. She began experimenting with growing corn and carrots in the castle garden. In 703, Demetria accompanied her mother on a trip to the kingdoms of the far southern region of Muni, Harvlet, Clifford, Wayne, Goat, etc. During her travel to the Clifford Kingdom, there was a ball to welcome the queen and her daughter. During this ball, Demetria was forced to talk to Prince Clifford and his friend, Prince Albinus Alistair. Demetria didn't really take much interest in Prince Clifford, but she seemed to get along more with Prince Albinus. Demetria and Albinus became rather good friends, and after Demetria returned back to the Butterfly Kingdom, the two became pen pals. In the next year of 704, Demetria earned the royal family wand. It transformed into a shovel representing her love for planting and gardening. Demetria was rather unstable when it came to magic. She messed up spells very often, usually resulting in huge explosions or a strange mutation of the spell. Now that Demetria was older and more mature, she began to become skeptical of her father. She realized that she really had no similarities with him and began to speculate that she had another father. She knew her mother wouldn't reveal the truth, or so she thought, so she decided to investigate it herself. Demetria's wand. She started by interviewing the lords and ladies of the houses to see if any of them were possibly her father, as they were obvious suspects. That proved to not work, though, and she ended up feeling distracted and stressed the next few days. While venting to Elaine, she ended up revealing that her mother told her stories of seeing the pregnant queen enter the village and always visit a certain house. She even reported seeing the queen come there with a baby daughter, Demetria. With this information, Demetria finally had something to confront her mother with. When confronting Queen Rhodesia, she explained everything, how her real father was a commoner, and how Demetria was a not unpure baby. She was originally going to tell Demetria later on in her life. Demetria was thankful for finally knowing the truth, but the fact that she was the result of an unplanned pregnancy between the relationship of a queen and a commoner had extremely big effect on her self-esteem and self-worth. She felt as if she was useless, a mistake. Of course, Demetria had to keep this secret from everyone, so when being asked by Elaine, she just pretended she didn't hear her or made up an excuse to leave. Of course, Elaine was suspicious, but eventually after a while she just shrugged it off and forgot. Demetria began to visit Albinus in the Alistair Kingdom every few months after Albinus brought up the idea in a letter. The two began to form a more solid friendship with these visits, and in 707 announced their relationship. In 708, Demetria and Elaine were in a carriage on the way to the Alistair Kingdom when suddenly the carriage was attacked and the wheels were cut off. The guards outside were knocked out, leaving them no sorts of protection against the attackers. Elaine prepared her bow and arrow, while Demetria had a panic attack. All of a sudden, Elaine and Demetria were grabbed by huge hands from the windows of the carriage and dragged into the forest in different directions. The grip on her arm was finally let go when Demetria was thrown onto the ground after being dragged deep into the forest. Demetria's teary eyes looked up to a 9 feet tall monster with an alligator-like appearance. He forced Demetria onto the hard dirt ground and began ripping her clothes off as she screamed and cried. She tried to resist but couldn't go against the monster's strength. Oh my gosh, I didn't realize how dark this biography would be. The monster ended up raping her. After the monster had finished satisfying himself, he left Demetria to rot on the ground. The sun was beginning to set as Demetria tried to find her way back to the path. Once night fell upon her, Demetria dropped to the ground, shaking and crying, feeling completely traumatized and helpless. It was just then that a group of guards approached her. She looked up to see that Albinus was leading them. Apparently, after hours passed without the expected arrival of the princess and her friend, a search party was sent out. Albinus also went. Demetria and Elaine were immediately sent back to the Butterfly Kingdom. Elaine had also been assaulted, and Rhodesia forbade Demetria from leaving the kingdom anymore. This experience heavily scared Demetria for the rest of her life, leaving her with an anxiety disorder and a flaming hatred for all monsters. Demetria told Albinus the news in a letter. He replied saying he would visit her in the Butterfly Kingdom. Illegitimate child, yes, that's the word I was looking for. Demetria told Albinus the news in a letter. He replied saying he could visit her in the Butterfly Kingdom, which Demetria saw no problem with. The two began seeing each other again in 710. Albinus proposed. Demetria and Albinus' wedding day was the only day in the years Demetria felt truly happy in years, and her coronation also helped with that. However, it was that night of the wedding day that Albinus' horrible alcohol addiction began. There was also some controversy about the marriage, as it was the first foreign marriage. The queen began to trying to put an end to the famine in her kingdom, and she had dreamed of for years. She firstly started by researching the soil and infected plants. Within a month's time, she eventually was able to make a spell to supposedly fix the diseased fields of corn. That night, Demetria went into the cornfields to perform the spell. She stuck her wand into the ground and recited the spell. The wand crystal began glowing, and a magical vines grew out of the hole her wand had made before everything faded away. The next morning, Demetria looked out her window to see the cornfields, full, yellow, and fresh, cleansed of disease. The entire kingdom was renounced with joy, and people could be seen celebrating in the streets. The day was filled with bliss. Though it wouldn't stay that way, word spread of the new corn to the monsters, and they plotted a raid on the cornfields. When gazing upon the fresh field from the windows, when she noticed the monsters stealing corn, a sense of fury came over her as she sent a battalion of guards into the fields. She also fired a flaming mortar, which ended up setting the entire fields on fire. Demetria's crown. Demetria blamed everything on the monsters and sent them to be beheaded, not to mention the entire field was burnt to a crisp. Demetria used the spell again, but the result she saw the next morning was not what she expected. The field was full with corn, but the corn itself had moldy lumps and had green undertone. Many people ended up eating it and getting extremely bad stomach sickness. They would have painful diarrhea and indigestion before dying. At the end of the year, however, Demetria gave birth to her only daughter, Meteora. She inherited ginger hair and green eyes from her father and had flames on her cheeks. Albinus's alcohol addiction began getting extreme and took a toll on him mentally. He began yelling at Demetria and even started physically abusing her whenever she ignored him in his drunken state. He became lazy and heavily overweight too. He barely put any effort into his and Demetria's relationship anymore. Demetria ended up destroying the corn once more and made multiple attempts at regrowing the corn, each one being more and more rushed, each result coming out more and more mutated and horrible. The reason the spell wasn't working was, 1, she was rushing it, and 2, her mental state was heavily decreasing, leaving her unstable with her magic. Rhodesia ended up dying that year in 715 due to glomerulonephritis. Her mother's death was an extreme effect on Demetria. She was even seen having panic attacks and crying uncontrollably for the next few weeks, and in the following months of that year was depressed. With her mother's death's effect on her mental state, mixed with her spell casting, I could only imagine the consequences the corn she produced could have on the kingdom. Disease and epidemic or worse. For this reason, I recommended she stopped trying for the time being. Thankfully, she took my advice. Though instead of giving up temporarily, she decided to quit for good. Her depression left her unmotivated. She only found comfort in taking care of Meteora. In 723, Demetria and Albinus got into a huge fight. Albinus was drunk and began running at her with his fist in the air, and at the moment of panic, Demetria blasted him with her wand. Thankfully, Albinus wasn't too harmed, but after the night, the two slept in different rooms and barely ever spoke again. The only reason Albinus didn't leave was because of Meteora. The next year, in 724, Albinus died when going to retrieve his daughter's teddy bear. He was attacked by a monster and killed. Demetria passed the wand down to Meteora in 728. One night, Demetria woke up feeling as if she was going to vomit. She began to rapidly vomit all over her room and even coughed up blood. She continued to have these symptoms for the next few days, and when asked by a healer, she recalled that she ate some strange-tasting corn soup the previous night. After many days of rest and drinking non-rotten soup, the queen was back to, stable health. Her liver and stomach had been heavily affected by her sickness, and she was no longer able to consume spicy foods or meat. Because of her decreased health, she passed those around to Meteora in 735. Sadly, during a summer night in 740, the queen passed away of liver failure. The kingdom mourned her death, and she was buried next to her grandmother, Celestia. Demetria performing her corn growth spell. And that biography was a lot darker than I expected. That's for sure. Let's see. The next biography is Nebula the Scarred. Who is Nebula the daughter of? A sweet yet reckless girl was what the soul was until she studied the forbidden and her soul was scarred for eternity. Please let this one not be as dark. Oh wow, she's pretty. Nebula Butterfly, the Scarred. Born 777, died 822. Was queen 793 to 912. To 812. I don't know why I said 812. Okay, married to Alaric Flowers. Children, Prostadia Butterfly, Pandora Butterfly. Wait, is this the next biography? Just a minute, guys. Let me look to see. I thought I clicked on the right one, but this doesn't look quite right to me. Well, it's the next one in order, so we'll just read it. Nebula was born to Queen Melano in the year of 777. She had black hair and dark green eyes from her father, Ether. As for her cheek marks, she had green skulls on her cheeks. As a child, Nebula was very playful and energetic, if a bit reckless. Though her childhood was not the happiest, her parents were strict and overbearing, whom forbade her from leaving the castle gates. Nebula would argue with her mother over these matters, causing their relationship to become strained. The numerous amount of rules would build up Nebula's rebellious attitude over the years, causing her to sneak out of the castle in late hours of the night and go to visit her friends. In 784, Melano announced to Nebula she would have an arranged marriage with Alaric Flowers. Nebula was furious and demanded it to be called off, but of course it wasn't. On Independence Day of 790, Melano decided to teach Nebula about the history of independence. Nebula barely paid any attention at all while her mother was blabbling about the battles. The only thing that intrigued her was Queen Mariposa. After this, Nebula began to grow curious about her family's history. Nebula began doing research on her family history and the previous butterfly queens, from Mariposa to her grandmother Meteora. Nebula studied their lives and their accomplishments for the kingdom. She also began to write records of them, which would establish her passion for writing. In the following year of 791, Nebula inherited the wand. The wand head was a skull which resulted in some concerned faces, including her mother, but it didn't bother Nebula. Nebula's wand, Raven of Time. Now that she had the magic wand, Nebula was extremely interested to see what she was capable of. She began studying the magic and spells of previous queens, but she was most captivated by Galaxia the Clairvoyant and Atmospheria. She began doing extensive research on them, but found that most records of their spells were hidden or didn't exist, which only made her curiosity grow. Despite her efforts, Nebula wasn't able to come across anything relating to their magic. One day, however, after sneaking out of the castle, she decided to go on a little exploration in the forest. While walking off the path, she discovered a strange building. When walking to the entrance, she recognized the stone statues of Galaxia and entered the building. The inside of the building was a small library with an extremely dim lighting except for a few torches. Spiderwebs and dust filled the building as if it was abandoned. Nebula began doing some exploring of the place and read some of the books. She then realized the books were a collection of notes, records, and studies from Galaxia and Atmospherea's clairvoyant studies. She also came across a room with statues of the Queens of Muni. From that day on, Nebula would visit the library and study the texts, and soon enough, Nebula began her own clairvoyant studies, as well as looking into the past, through history, and adding to the library's collection. However, just like Galaxia and Atmosphere, she found that the deeper into the future she went, the less she could obtain from them. She was eager to go deeper and deeper, so she began incorporating dark magic into her spells. The dark magic would enhance her spells heavily, making them extremely powerful. It would even break the magical locks of Atmosphere's spells. She began looking into the future of her descendants and the future queens. All the way past even your generation, and her vision still remained clear. She was intrigued by them and wrote down everything she saw down into the slimmest detail. Though soon became addicted to the dark magic and created a plethora of fortune and clairvoyant spells revolving around dark magic. With the locks of Atmosphere's spells gone and dark magic enhancing them, the possibilities were endless. Nebula uncovered many of the secrets of the previous queens, in which she all wrote down in a certain book. She kept it in a locked chest. Of course, about after a month, she began noticing the side effects of her dark magic. At first it was the slight purple veins, but they soon grew to cover almost 1/4 of her arm. To hide it she wore gloves, but the thing she couldn't hide was her sleep deprivation from the hours of studying in the night she did. Rumors began to spread about the princess. In the year 792, Nebula and her future husband, Alaric, started a relationship. At first, Nebula hated him, but after the two danced together at balls and royal events, they began to bond. One specific vision Nebula took note of was of that of a cult, a woman with dark hair and eyes, with cracked skulls on her cheeks, a battle between her and a young princess. She seemed to have many followers, and such as cloaked archers and witches. In 793, Nebula took Alaric to her secret library. Tension began to build up, and the two began to take off each other's clothes until they went on to make use of the library's comfy couch. The deeper Nebula got into her studies, the more darker they became. She began witnessing horrific things, but one night everything would take a turn for the worst. While performing a spell, her visions began growing blurry and short. She tried to enhance the spell, but it resulted in a malfunctioning and an explosion occurred, followed by putting Nebula in a trance state with her eyes black. In this trance state, Nebula would witness horrific things. She felt completely horrified, and a sharp striking pain filled her body as if she was being stabbed. Even though she was only in the trance for about a minute, it would feel as if it was 8 hours long. When she came out of the trance crying, her cheeks faded black and cracked, and the ends of her hair faded white. Her dark veins grew all the way up to her arms, and she gained bags under her eyes. From this moment, Nebula would never be the same. The once happy-go-lucky girl turned cold and traumatized, barely ever speaking, and paranoia filled her to the brim. Nebula would also develop depression from the event, and her use of magic became limited. She abandoned the library and never returned. Her mother discovered the use of her dark magic and punished her, only worsening her mental state. Word of her dark magic use and her change spread, and she was labeled as the Corrupted. Nebula's crown. Being traumatized at the wand's powers, Nebula created a spell to destroy the wand in a moment of crisis. It would be named the Whispering Spell, as you would whisper the spell. About a month later, Melino fell ill. Due to this, Nebula had to claim the throne. She begged and begged not to assume the throne, but the MHC left her with no choice. Only a week after her coronation, she realized she was 1 month pregnant. 9 months later, she gave birth to her daughter, Prostadia. The birth was extremely stressful for Nebula, leaving her on bed rest for over a week. Royal duties were not Nebula's strong suit. It would leave her very stressed, and she was not good with decisions. Some neighboring kingdoms sensed Nebula's weakness and called off trade, leaving the kingdom's famine to increase heavily, as well as poverty. Throughout the years, Nebula's depression began getting worse, and so did her reputation. She began becoming more and more unstable, leading to her leadership diminishing from bad to horrible, and the kingdom would suffer the effect. In the year of 794, Nebula became pregnant once more. This was extremely big news, since ever since Venus, the queens of the Dark Age only bore one child. For this, rumors started to circulate that she used dark magic to create another child. After the birth of her second daughter, she named Pandora. Nebula was ridiculed for the fake rumors, with people calling her a dark magic moth, among other names. Pandora would also be bullied throughout her life for this. Nebula and Ulrich's relationship would also begin to deteriorate around 796. Due to Nebula's depression and paranoid state, Ulrich began visiting other women before starting an affair with Ashlige Millet. In 796, during a day at the pool, Nebula thought she would cheer herself with the sun and some swimming. Just before she could dip her feet in, she felt a tight grip on her arm, followed by slowly losing consciousness. She awoke to being in a shed with her clothes ripped off. Then it came to her what happened. She started crying alone in the shed. Nebula was too traumatized to tell anyone, even her husband. Her paranoia only worsened, and so did her anxiety. In the year of 807, monster bandits began to start robbing local stores of the kingdom. Nebula was strongly advised to take action in council meetings about the issue. While she was also advised to lay low, all of the pressures began to stress her, though she ultimately made the decision to make a retaliating attack on the bandits after pressure from Lord Redbird. Of course, the bandits didn't like this retaliation at all, and fired back another attack, this time with their entire camp. Attacks were made back and forth. Multiple battles would then take place. Prostadia also began to fighting in the battles against Nebula's will. Nebula punished Prostadia for disobeying her, but regardless, Prostadia continued fighting. The two began to argue with each other, straining their relationship. In 809, Pandora was kidnapped by the monster bandits in her sleep. They refused to give her back unless Nebula paid 500,000 gold suns. The kingdom was in a huge debt, and it was almost impossible to bring up that much money to them without the kingdom collapsing. Prostadia, however, proposed a plan. What happened the next night will be revealed in Prostadia's chapter, but regardless, it ended in the chief of the bandits dead and Pandora being long gone, never to be seen again. Nebula was distraught over the loss of Pandora. She would be seen breaking down crying in random moments and going completely mad. This would also affect Prostadia. She felt extreme guilt over the events leading to her sister's disappearance. In 810, Nebula walked in on her husband Alaric and Ashlanage in bed together. The atmosphere was tense, but Nebula simply smiled at them, turned around and left the room before crying in her office alone. This is speculated to be where Nebula's self-harm would start. In 812 was the year Nebula abdicated the throne at the age of 35. Her daughter Prostadia would take on the role as queen. Nebula's years retired from the queen were some of her worst. She would be left with nothing to do. She felt lifeless and empty. Many days she struggled to even get out of bed. Nebula would see the birth of her granddaughter Umbria in 818. In the year of 822, Nebula's life came to a grim dark end. She simply gave up one night. She didn't want to play the hard game that was life. Prostadia would come across her body the next morning, and she was declared 2 weeks of mourning by her mother, Nebula, during her clairvoyant studies. And that was the also dark biography of Nebula the Scarred by infaminxy. I'm just going to see who's next. We're going to end it there, but I just want to quickly see who is next. We're almost done. I feel like we could possibly finish these biographies next time we pick them up. But as I said, that is where we will end it today. Thank you all for dropping by. And these biographies were a lot darker than I remembered. I'm pretty sure I read all of them, at least up until Comet at one point, but I don't remember them being this dark. Oh my goodness. I was not prepared for that, and sorry you didn't get trigger warnings or anything. But thank you all for joining today. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you all next time. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Bye, 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 bye. Love you all.